The night is absolute. No moon pierces the tropical clouds above Murrow Island on this December evening in 1944 that inside the cockpit of his Northrop P-61 Black Widow, Major Carroll Smith can't see his own instruments without the faint red glow from his panel lights. Beyond the canopy, the darkness is total, the horizon erased, the world reduced to pure void. Somewhere in that void, a Japanese bomber drifts unseen. Behind Smith, separated by a thin bulkhead, Lieutenant Philip Porter hunches over a glowing cathode ray tube. His eyes burn against the green phosphorescence as he tracks a single bright blip sliding across the screen 0.4 miles distant. 3.5. The blip marks a Mitsubishi G4M bomber, what the Americans call a Betty, carrying its load toward the U.S. airfield at San Jose. The Japanese crew has no clue they are being stalked. For the past 6 minutes, they've been hunted by something they cannot see, cannot hear, and have no means to detect up Porter's voice cuts through the intercom. Contact holding steady. 3 miles, 11 o'clock low. Smith banks the massive twin-engine fighter, feeling the big aircraft respond with surprising agility for its 29,000-pound weight. The P-61 is larger than some medium bombers, yet it handles like a nimble fighter. He nudges the throttles forward, closing in. This is a new face of warfare, an invisible hunt that has turned the night sky from sanctuary to execution ground. For the Japanese crew ahead, their war is about to end in a way beyond comprehension. For 3 years since Pearl Harbor, Japanese bombers had ruled the night. They haunted Allied outposts across the Pacific, bombing under cover of darkness and slipping away untouched. American troops had coined dozens of nicknames for these unseen raiders: Washing Machine Charlie, Bed Check Charlie, Louis the Louse, each name echoing the helpless frustration of those below. The psychological toll was immense. A single Japanese bomber could keep an entire base awake for hours, shattering rest, fraying nerves, and sowing dread. Soldiers would hear the uneven drone of twin engines and know that somewhere above, unseen and unreachable, an enemy was circling. Anti-aircraft guns fired blindly into the night. Searchlights swept uselessly across empty skies. Then came the sudden whistle and crash of bombs, and the darkness swallowed the attacker once more. American attempt to fight back were mostly futile. The Douglas P-70, a hastily converted A-20 attack bomber with crude radar, was utterly inadequate. Its British-designed SCR-540 radar had an effective range of barely 2 miles under perfect conditions. The radar operator, crammed into the nose, watched faint green blips vanish in ground clutter. Even when contact was made, the P-70 was too slow and too clumsy to close in. It took 4 to 5 minutes to reach 20,000 feet, and its ceiling topped out below 28,000. Japanese crews quickly learned these weaknesses and adjusted their tactics. But in June 1944, a new predator appeared in the Pacific, the Northrop P-61 Black Widow. It represented a total redefinition of night warfare. Unlike the converted bombers and day fighters that preceded it, the P-61 was purpose-built from the ground up to hunt and kill in darkness. Every element of the design served that mission. Its twin-boom structure and 2 Pratt and Whitney R2800 double Wasp engines, each producing 2,000 horsepower, gave it both power and stability for long night patrols. Its broad, high-aspect wings provided lift for its heavy fuel, armament, and radar load while preserving impressive maneuverability. Despite its 66-foot wingspan and nearly 50-foot length, pilots reported that the P-61 could turn and climb with remarkable agility. Only outside loops, prolonged inverted flight, and intentional spins were prohibited. Its 3-man crew operated in a unique layout tailored to night combat. The pilot sat forward beneath a multi-panel greenhouse canopy. Behind and slightly higher sat the gunner, who controlled the dorsal turret when installed. In the rear fuselage, the radar operator manned his scope, isolated by bulkheads and racks of electronics, a deliberate design choice allowing him to focus entirely on the ghostly signals that meant life or death in the dark. His world was a glowing green screen of the SCR-720 radar, and his skill in reading it meant the difference between a successful intercept and another Japanese bomber vanishing into the dark. The armament was formidable. 4 20mm Hispano M2 autocannons were mounted in the lower fuselage, firing forward with a combined rate of 2,400 rounds per minute. Each high-explosive shell weighed about 4 ounces and could shred aluminum A-frames like paper. The dorsal turret, when installed, carried 4.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, which could be aimed and fired by either the gunner or the radar operator, providing protection for the upper and rear hemispheres. Some P-61 variants also carried underwing bombs or external fuel tanks for long-range missions. But the true weapon, the innovation that turned the P-61 from a May A-plane into a revolutionary weapon of night war, was a radar in its nose. The SCR-720 airborne intercept radar marked a breakthrough in detection technology. Unlike earlier sets that relied on long wavelengths and were played by ground clutter in short range, the SCR-720 used microwave frequencies that offered exceptional precision and distance. The system centered on a 30-inch parabolic dish antenna that rotated continuously inside the nose radome, sweeping the air ahead in a constant arc. It could detect bomber-sized targets beyond 5 miles in ideal conditions, and often maintained 3 to 4 mile range even in poor weather. The operator's circular display showed returns as glowing green blips. From those blips, he could judge bearing, range, and relative altitude by studying the signal shape and brightness. A skilled operator could tell whether the contact was a lone aircraft or a formation, estimate its speed from the rate of closure, and even infer the type of plane from the radar echo's character. Large bombers gave strong, steady returns, while smaller fighters flickered faintly. Formations appeared as stretched or irregular shapes. The entire system weighed more than 400 pounds, not counting wiring and mounts, but the capability it gave was worth every ounce. For the first time in the Pacific War, American night fighters could locate enemy planes far enough out to plan an intercept. Crews no longer needed searchlights or visual sightings. The radar operator could direct the pilot into perfect position while the target was still miles away, sliding unseen into the enemy's blind spot before striking. To enhance a P-61's invisibility, Northrop and the Army Air Forces introduced a special night camouflage. Early production models came in standard olive drab and neutral gray, but combat experience proved as inadequate. Searchlights could still pick out the plane's surfaces against the night sky. In February 1944, the Army adopted a new finish, jet black, applied directly to bare metal instead of over existing paint. The result was a surface that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. When a jet black P-61 passed through a searchlight beam, it appeared only as a brief shadow, often dismissed as an illusion. Japanese operators sometimes lit up a Black Widow without realizing it, letting the fighter continue its deadly approach. The P-61 creation had been born of urgent need. In October 1940, while London endured nightly Luftwaffe raids, the U.S. Army Air Corps recognized the coming necessity for a true night fighter should America enter the war. Britain's success with radar-equipped aircraft like the Bristol Beaufighter and the Havilland Mosquito proved the concept, but the United States lacked any equivalent. On January 30, 1941, nearly a year before Pearl Harbor, the Army awarded Northrop a contract for 2 prototype XP-61s. Development advanced rapidly despite daunting technical challenges. Jack Northrop, the company's founder and chief designer, assembled a team to build an aircraft around a new SCR-720 radar, which was still under development itself. The requirements were exacting: a 3-man crew, heavy armament, endurance for hours-long patrols, and a full suite of electronic gear. It needed to be fast enough to overtake bombers, stable enough for precise gunnery, maneuverable despite its bulk, and safe to fly in total darkness. The first XP-61 took to the air on May 26, 1942. Northrop test pilot Vance Breeze reported excellent handling for such an unconventional design. The twin-boom layout gave the aircraft exceptional stability, while the broad tail surfaces provided smooth control and steady flight characteristics, an ideal foundation for the night fighter that would soon dominate the Pacific sky. The P-61 maintained positive control even at low speeds, and its wide-track tricycle landing gear made ground handling simple, a crucial advantage for night operations. But transitioning from prototype to full production proved more difficult than expected. The SCR-720 radar system suffered from developmental delays, and the General Electric dorsal turret, shared with the B-29 Superfortress, was in short supply, with the B-29 program taking precedence. As a result, many early P-61A models left the factory without the turret, and some lacked fully functional radar equipment. Flight testing also revealed that when the turret traversed, it caused aerodynamic buffeting that affected the plane's stability. Fixing this required structural reinforcements, delaying production further. The first P-61s finally reached combat units in March 1944 when the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron arrived in England. By then, the war had entered its fifth year, and the need for a true night interceptor was critical. Across the Pacific, Japanese raiders still struck Allied positions at will. The primitive P-70s and radarless P-38 Lightnings used in desperation managed only scattered victories. Cooperative intercept attempts with ground-based searchlights were dangerous and rarely successful, as friendly fighters often flew into their own flak zones or lost visual contact entirely. The 6th Night Fighter Squadron, based on Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands, received the first P-61s to reach the Pacific in early June 1944. The aircraft arrived disassembled in crates, and maintenance crews worked tirelessly to assemble them, fitting wings to fuselages, mounting engines, aligning propellers, connecting electrical systems, and fine-tuning the fragile radar arrays. As the black aircraft took shape on the line, pilots who had struggled with the inadequate P-70s saw a new hope that the nightly Japanese raids could finally be stopped. The first operational P-61 mission in the Pacific took place on June 25, 1944. Several aircraft were launched on patrol, but no enemy contact was made. The mission continued nightly as pilots and radar operators refined their intercept tactics, learning to function as perfectly synchronized teams. The pilot had to place absolute trust in his radar operator, turning, climbing, or diving purely on verbal commands. The radar operator, in turn, had to read the flickering green echoes with precision, separating enemy aircraft from weather returns or ground clutter. Then, on the night of June 30th, 1944, 5 days after their first mission, Second Lieutenant Dale Haberman and his radar operator, Flight Officer Raymond Mooney, were patrolling over Saipan when ground control reported an unidentified intruder inbound toward the island. Haberman, flying his aircraft Moon Happy, acknowledged and turned to intercept. Mooney leaned over his radar scope, scanning through interference from the island's volcanic terrain until he spotted it, a bright blip, 4 miles out, moving straight toward Saipan. "Contact," he called into the intercom. 12 o'clock, slightly high. Haberman advanced his throttles and began to climb, following Mooney's guidance. The range closed rapidly. 3 miles, 2 miles. Then Mooney noticed something strange. The return wasn't a single, solid point. It flickered and split, showing 2 distinct but overlapping contacts. "There's 2 of them," he said. "Looks like a fighter flying tight on a bomber." It was a common Japanese tactic, the fighter using the bomber as a guide, ready to pounce on any interceptors. Against older night fighters, it was deadly effective, but against radar-equipped hunters like the Black Widow, it was a fatal mistake. Haberman maneuvered beneath and behind the formation, sliding into the bomber's blind spot. At 1 mile, he reduced throttle to prevent overshooting. At half a mile, he could just make out dark outlines against the slightly lighter sky. The twin engines of the bomber were unmistakable. At 300 yards, Haberman squeezed the trigger. The 4 20mm cannons thundered in unison, spitting a torrent of fire. In 3 seconds, 60 explosive rounds ripped through the bomber's fuselage and wing roots. The enemy aircraft didn't explode, it simply disintegrated. 1 wing tore free, and the bomber rolled inverted before plunging into the sea in a trail of flame. The escorting fighter, startled by the flashes of gunfire, broke formation and swung around hard, searching for its attacker. Mooney saw it instantly on his radar and shouted, "He's on our tail." Haberman reacted without hesitation. He rolled sharply into a steep dive, dropping the left wing and pushing full throttle as he kicked the rudder pedals, throwing the heavy night fighter into evasive maneuvers that few enemies could match. The enemy pilot's aim was off. A burst of tracer fire streaked past harmlessly. Before he could correct, the P-61 was gone, diving into the darkness below, its jet-black paint blending perfectly with the night sea. The Japanese pilot, now alone and disoriented in unfamiliar skies, chose survival over valor and turned for home. Haberman and Mooney circled back to their patrol sector, adrenaline still surging but their aircraft untouched. It was the first confirmed kill by a P-61 in the Pacific theater, and more importantly, undeniable proof of concept. The Black Widow could locate enemy planes in total darkness, close and undetected, and unleash overwhelming firepower before the target even realized it was under attack. Word of the victory spread swiftly among night fighter units. Pilots who had endured months of fruitless patrols and inadequate aircraft now had a weapon capable of fulfilling its purpose. Ground crews redoubled their efforts, motivated by the knowledge that their maintenance kept a game-changing aircraft in the sky. Intelligence officers soon detected a subtle but significant shift in Japanese tactics. Night raids became less frequent, and when they did occur, bombers appeared hesitant, more likely to abort at the faintest sign of trouble. The Japanese command struggled to understand what had changed. They knew the Americans had introduced a new night fighter, but the true capabilities of its radar remained a mystery. Surviving aviators described eerie, unseen attackers that struck without warning. Some mentioned hearing a strange whistling sound seconds before cannon shells tore their aircraft apart, the rush of air over the P-61's wide wings just before the kill. Others never saw or heard anything at all, only the sudden, violent destruction of their aircraft as explosive rounds ripped through it. As the summer of 1944 turned to autumn, more P-61 squadrons entered combat across the Pacific. The 419th Night Fighter Squadron, operating first from Guadalcanal and later the Philippines, began recording regular kills against Japanese raiders. The 421st Squadron, flying with the 5th Air Force in New Guinea in the Southwest Pacific, carried out both interception missions and night ground attacks, using their radar for navigation through total darkness. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron, destined to produce the top night fighter ace in the Army Air Forces, arrived later that year and immediately launched aggressive patrols over the Philippines. The 418th's commanding officer, Major Carroll Smith, was a seasoned combat pilot who had flown P-38 Lightnings before transitioning to the P-61. He brought a disciplined, analytical approach to night fighting, understanding that victory depended on seamless teamwork between pilot and radar operator. He and his radar officer, Lieutenant Philip Porter, spent hours training until their coordination became instinctive. On December 29, 1944, Smith and Porter were on patrol over Muro when ground control vectored them toward a contact inbound for the American airfield at San Jose. Porter detected the target at 5 miles and began calling out corrections. The intercept unfolded smoothly, the range closing steadily until Smith positioned the Black Widow behind and slightly below the target. At 1 mile, he saw it, a twin-engine bomber, most likely a Betty, flying straight and level, unaware of its hunter. Smith eased into 400 yards, aligned the gun sight, and fired. The bomber erupted in a fireball, its fuel tanks igniting in a burst of orange light that briefly turned night to day before fading into darkness. They resumed patrol. Less than an hour later, ground control directed them to another contact. Porter again guided the intercept. Smith attacked, and another bomber fell in flames into the Philippine jungle. Then came a third engagement, another kill, and then a fourth. 4 enemy aircraft destroyed in a single mission, an astonishing feat that showcased both the P-61's power and the crew's precision. Under Army Air Forces policy, Smith and Porter shared the credit equally. The pilot's marksmanship was nothing without the radar operator's detection, and the operator's tracking was meaningless without the pilot's skill. By the end of December 1944, the 418th Squadron had shot down 12 Japanese aircraft in just 13 nights of combat. Other squadrons across the Pacific were matching their success. The balance of nocturnal warfare had shifted completely. Once, Japanese bomber crews had flown with impunity, trusting the night as their ally. Now, they feared it. Somewhere in that same darkness, unseen and unheard, a P-61 might already be tracking them, its radar sweeping the void, its guns loaded, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Japanese intelligence, interrogating survivors, finally began to piece the puzzle together. The Americans had deployed an aircraft equipped with technology that could find and follow them even through complete darkness. The enemy in darkness at ranges of several miles. These aircraft were fast enough to intercept bombers, agile enough to maneuver for firing positions, and armed heavily enough to destroy targets with only brief bursts of fire. Countermeasures were urgently needed. The Japanese response to the growing P-61 threat evolved through late 1944 and into 1945, but each attempt failed against the Americans' overwhelming technological edge. Bomber crews began flying higher, hoping altitudes above 30,000 feet would exceed the night fighter's operational ceiling. The P-61 simply followed. With a service ceiling surpassing 40,000 feet, the Black Widow could easily climb beyond the limits of most Japanese bombers, especially those burdened with full payloads. Some Japanese units experimented with chaff, thin strips of aluminum foil cut to specific lengths intended to create false echoes on radar screens. Known to the Germans as Doppel and to the British as window, the method had worked against long-wavelength radar systems. Japanese engineers carefully calculated the dimensions of chaff to confuse the American radar, and bomber crews began scattering the metallic strips during their runs. But the SCR-720 radar operated on shorter microwave frequencies, largely immune to such interference. The chaff produced brief, fuzzy clutter on the scope, but trained radar operators easily distinguish it from the solid, moving blip of a real aircraft. The effect was negligible. Japanese night fighters also tried escorting bomber formations, but coordination proved nearly impossible. Their aircraft lacked advanced radar and reliable radios, making it extremely difficult to maintain contact in darkness. Pilots had to keep visual sight of their bombers the entire mission, forcing tight formations that increased both visibility and vulnerability by creating larger radar returns. Moreover, Japan's fighters were designed for daylight dogfighting, not the stable, precise flying required at night. Many pilots lacked the instrument training to handle total darkness, and formation collisions were common. By early 1945, Japanese night bombing doctrine had changed drastically. Where they once approached targets directly and steadily to ensure accurate drops, crews now zigzagged wildly, altering heading and altitude to evade interception. Upon any sign of American night fighters, radio chatter, searchlights, or other aircraft reports, some crews immediately dumped their bombs into the sea and fled rather than face a Black Widow. Intelligence from the period shows how deeply this fear took hold. Bomber crews that once exuded confidence now flew in constant dread. Every noise, every flicker of light, every instrument twitch might signal an unseen American fighter closing in. The most terrifying part was the helplessness, the realization that they could be hunted without knowing it, and that the first sign of danger might be 20mm shells tearing their aircraft apart. Entire bomber units eventually abandoned night operations. Losses were too high, and the psychological strain crippled morale even in squadrons with intact aircraft. Others tried alternate tactics, flying at extremely low altitudes to slip beneath radar coverage or timing attacks for storms and cloud banks that might weaken radar returns. Neither solution worked for long. The P-61's radar could still pick up aircraft flying low if angles were favorable, and poor weather that hindered radar also made bombing far less accurate. The toll on both sides was immense. For American night fighter crews, the danger was not just from enemy action but from the mission itself. Flying 4 or 5 hours in absolute darkness demanded unwavering focus. Pilots navigated entirely by instruments, with no horizon or visual cues. Trusting one's senses instead of the gauges was often fatal. Spatial disorientation in darkness could kill as surely as enemy guns. Transitioning from blind instrument flight to a sudden visual attack required instantaneous judgment under crushing pressure, testing human reflexes and perception to their limits. For radar operators, the task was equally exhausting, staring for hours at glowing screens, interpreting the faintest blips, and guiding intercept that determined whether both men lived or died. Targets, maintaining long stretches of intense concentration on the glowing radar scope, scanning for faint, fleeting echoes that might signal an enemy aircraft hidden among the clutter of ground returns and weather. Even a momentary lapse in attention, a few seconds of distraction, could mean missing a vital contact. The responsibility was enormous. The pilot flew blind, depending entirely on the radar operator's interpretation. A single misread of the scope or an error in calculating position could send the P-61 away from its target, or worse, directly into terrain or another aircraft. For the gunners, when carried as part of a 3-man crew, the role could be the most frustrating of all. They endured hours of darkness in cramped compartments, with nothing to do unless attacked from the rear, a rare occurrence given the P-61's speed advantage over most Japanese planes. Many units eventually switched to 2-man crews, removing the gunner position entirely to save weight and increase fuel range. The dorsal turret, once a hallmark feature, was frequently locked forward to give the pilot extra firepower, though it sacrificed rear defense. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing and enabling notifications. It helps us keep producing deep dive content like this. The P-61 demanded relentless upkeep. Its twin engines, intricate wiring, and delicate radar systems required constant attention from skilled ground crews. The radar, in particular, was notoriously temperamental. It relied on hundreds of vacuum tubes. Any single failure could render the system useless. The nose-mounted antenna's rotation mechanism needed exact alignment and frequent lubrication. The radar's waveguides, carrying high-frequency signals from transmitter to antenna, had to be kept meticulously dry and clean. Even one corroded joint, loose connector, or cracked insulator could degrade performance or cause total failure. Ground crews fought an unending battle against the Pacific's harsh environment. Humidity corroded metal and shorted circuits. Insects nested in junction boxes and chewed through insulation, and fine dust from unpaved runways infiltrated every crevice, grinding down moving parts. Improvisation became essential. Mechanics created makeshift moisture absorbers, fabricated part by hand when supplies ran short, and performed ingenious field repairs that defied manuals but kept aircraft flying. Supplying these night fighters across scattered island bases was another logistical nightmare. Spare parts traveled thousands of miles, passing through multiple depots before reaching the front lines. Radar test equipment was chronically scarce, and many technical manuals were outdated, failing to include newer modifications. Maintenance officers often had to cannibalize damaged planes to keep others in the air, juggling limited resources to maintain readiness. Despite these difficulties, P-61 units achieved remarkable operational reliability. Maintenance teams took pride in launching missions every night the weather allowed. Mechanics, armorers, and electronic specialists worked tirelessly through daylight hours, knowing their precision directly translated into lives saved and victories won. When a Black Widow returned safely from combat, its crew reporting another successful intercept, the ground team shared the triumph. It was their victory too. Tactically, the P-61's use evolved as crews gained experience with its systems. Early missions followed a straightforward plan. Ground radar detected enemy raids, night fighters were scrambled, and airborne radar operators guided intercepts as pilots maneuvered for attack. Success depended on flawless coordination between ground controllers and flight crews, with radio communication serving as a critical lifeline. Yet radio discipline in 1944 was often poor. In the chaos of night operations, multiple aircraft might crowd the same frequency, their overlapping messages garbling vital instructions. To overcome this, some crews developed personalized shorthand codes to streamline exchanges, while others maintained radio silence altogether, relying on their onboard radar for target acquisition. As tactics matured, several squadrons shifted from purely reactive defense to proactive hunting. Instead of waiting for vector orders from ground stations, P-61 crews began patrolling along known Japanese approach corridors, anticipating raid before they reached their targets, ready to strike from the darkness. Time. Night fighter units across the Pacific refined their technique for intercepting enemy aircraft by adopting more aggressive patrol strategies. Instead of merely responding to radar reports, they began loitering near enemy airfields, positioning themselves along predictable flight paths where Japanese bombers would assemble after takeoff or limp home after mission, moments when they were most vulnerable and least prepared for interception. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron, operating from bases in the Philippines, became especially proficient in these offensive patrols. Major Carroll Smith, who would ultimately end the war as a top-scoring night fighter ace in the Army Air Forces with 7 confirmed kills, was a key proponent of these tactics. He believed in striking first, taking the battle to the enemy before they could organize. Smith later reflected in his post-war accounts that destroying aircraft in total darkness was a thrilling experience requiring absolute trust between pilot and radar operator. His most famous mission occurred on the night of December 29th to 30th, 1944, when his crew destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft in a single sortie. The 418 Squadron's operational records from that period reveal an extraordinary tempo, 12 confirmed kills in just 13 nights, a feat that underscored both the P-61's exceptional design and the professionalism of the men who flew it. But not every mission yielded success. The inherent uncertainty of night operations meant that many sorties ended without a single contact. Weather was a constant adversary. The tropical Pacific's violent thunderstorms created massive radar echoes that masked genuine aircraft signatures. Torrential rains disrupted radio communication and made instrument flying treacherous. Heavy cloud layers obscured the visual cues pilots needed during final attacks when identifying a target before opening fire was essential. Combat losses, though comparatively low, were inevitable. Japanese gunners occasionally landed blind hits, firing in the split seconds when the P-61's muzzle flashes betrayed its location. Anti-aircraft artillery, both Japanese and American, pose an equal hazard. Friendly fire incidents claimed several aircraft. Overwater-to-mechanical failures were often fatal. There was no safe place to land in the vast blackness of the Pacific night. Navigational errors, vertigo, and mid-air collisions also exacted a toll. Still, the results were decisive. By the beginning of 1945, Japanese night bombing had collapsed as a viable strategy. The organized raids that once terrorized Allied outposts dwindled into sporadic lone wolf missions, many of which were abandoned at the first radar contact with an American fighter. The psychological reversal was profound. From 1941 through mid-1944, darkness had been Japan's ally. Their bombers had ruled the night skies, attacking it while U.S. forces endured sleepless nights, powerless to respond. That helplessness ended with the arrival of the P-61. Within 6 months of its debut in the Pacific, the Black Widow had turned night into hostile airspace for the enemy. Japanese air crews who once trusted the darkness now dreaded it, knowing that unseen American fighters could strike without warning. Fear replaced confidence. Raid became rare and hesitant. By early 1945, even senior Japanese commanders began questioning whether night operations were worth the mounting losses. Technological inferiority sealed their fate. Japan's efforts to field its own radar-equipped night fighters met limited success. The Nakajima J-1N1 Irving, hastily modified for night defense, managed occasional victories around the home islands, but its primitive radar lagged far behind Allied systems in range, clarity, and dependability. Japanese operators worked with vague, flickering echoes rather than the crisp, detailed return provided by the American SCR-720 radar. Meanwhile, Japan's industrial base was collapsing under relentless strategic bombing and material shortages. American factories turned out thousands of aircraft monthly, while Japanese plants struggled to produce even hundreds. The complex electronics required for radar, vacuum tubes, precision components, and rare metals were increasingly scarce. Even when Japanese engineers managed to design competitive systems, the nation's crippled manufacturing capacity made large-scale production impossible. The balance of technology, and with it the night sky, now belonged firmly to the Americans. Stage of the war. The human element magnified these material disadvantages. By 1945, Japan faced an acute shortage of skilled aviators. The relentless attrition of the previous 3 years had decimated its pre-war cadre of trained pilots and navigators. Replacement programs, hindered by chronic fuel shortages and the need to scatter training facilities to escape American bombing, produced flyers with limited experience and poor readiness for real combat. Night flying, which demanded precise instrument handling and hundreds of hours of training, suffered most. Many Japanese pilots lacked the essential proficiency to fly safely in darkness, even before facing enemy action. American night fighter crews, in contrast, underwent comprehensive preparation before deployment. The Army Air Forces established specialized night fighter schools where pilots and radar operators trained for months. Pilots logged hundreds of hours in instrument-only flights, mastering control without visual cues. Radar operators began on ground simulators before advancing to live airborne radar, learning to interpret scope readings and guide their pilots to intercepts. Two-man crews trained as cohesive teams, building the communication habits and mutual confidence vital for success in darkness. This investment yielded extraordinary battlefield results. Veteran P-61 crews recorded exceptional kill ratios. Top crews, like Major Carroll Smith and Lieutenant Porter of the 418 Squadron, developed near-instinctive coordination. Porter anticipated Smith's maneuvers and fine-tuned radar intercept vectors accordingly. Smith placed complete confidence in Porter's calls, executing turns and altitude changes on command without ever seeing the radar display. The synergy took months to perfect, but made them devastatingly effective once achieved. The disparity with Japanese capability became glaring when viewed in operational context. American night fighter units functioned within an integrated air defense network that included ground radar coverage, radio coordination, and centralized command centers tracking multiple targets and directing interceptors. When a Japanese raid appeared, controllers could immediately vector the nearest P-61 toward it while alerting anti-aircraft batteries and searchlights. Fighter crews received constant updates on target movement, enabling real-time tactical adjustments. Japanese bomber groups, by contrast, operated with minimal coordination. Communication with bases was limited to navigation and mission updates. Ground radar coverage was uneven and primitive compared to American systems. Most Japanese formations flew blind into hostile skies, unaware of American defenses or interceptors waiting ahead. When attacked by P-61s, they were isolated and unsupported. These American advantages in training and organization were multiplied by overwhelming industrial might. By 1945, U.S. production of aircraft, components, and munitions dwarfed Japan's capacity. A squadron that lost a P-61 could expect a replacement within days. Spare parts were plentiful, and ammunition arrived in steady supply. The U.S. logistical machine could replace losses indefinitely without slowing operations. Japan, on the other hand, was collapsing under the combined pressure of submarine warfare and strategic bombing. Essential materials lay at the bottom of the Pacific or trapped in devastated mines. Factories that once built aircraft engines or radar sets had been destroyed or crippled. Fuel scarcity meant that even surviving aircraft often remained grounded. Training flights were drastically reduced to save fuel, leaving new pilots even less prepared. These conditions fed a self-reinforcing decline in capability. Inexperienced flyers flew outdated aircraft with inferior equipment against an opponent that dominated in radar, production, and training. The resulting losses accelerated the depletion of Japan's dwindling pool of skilled airmen, crippling its ability to recover. By spring 1945, many air units existed mostly on paper, nominally operational but lacking aircraft, fuel, or trained crews. The broader consequence of American night fighter superiority extended far beyond the number of Japanese planes destroyed. The psychological effect on Japanese bomber crews steadily eroded the performance of their units, even during missions that avoided direct interception. Crews flying in constant fear of unseen attackers made navigation errors, released bombs inaccurately, and frequently aborted missions before reaching their objectives. The realization that darkness no longer guaranteed safety undermined the confidence that had defined Japanese night operations in the war's early years. The reduction of Japanese night bombing also brought tangible benefits to American forces. Airfields and depots that had once required heavy anti-aircraft protection and constant repairs could now operate more freely. Ships unloading at forward bases no longer halted each night under threat of attack. Frontline troops, once accustomed to sleepless nights in shelters, could rest undisturbed, improving combat efficiency. Individually, these seemed minor, but together they represented a significant operational advantage made possible by the P-61's dominance of the night. The Black Widow's achievements in the Pacific found parallels in other theaters, though tactics varied. In Europe, P-61 squadrons arrived in March 1944 and were soon engaged against German V-1 flying bombs. These early cruise missiles, launched by the hundreds toward Britain following the D-Day invasion, were small, fast, and difficult targets even in daylight. At night, only radar-equipped fighters could reliably intercept them. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron, first to arrive in England, scored its opening victory on July 15, 1944, when Lieutenant Hermann downed a V-1 over the Channel. The weapon posed special challenges. Its small radar profile and 400 miles per hour speed gave fighters only seconds to act, and its 1,000-pound warhead made close engagements risky. Ernst and other P-61 pilots refined tactics, requiring them to close within a few hundred yards, fire accurately, then immediately break away to avoid the explosion. The aircraft's 20mm cannons shooted this task perfectly, capable of destroying the missile control systems or detonating it at range. In the following weeks, P-61 crews accounted for dozens of V-1 kills, contributing materially to Britain's defense and proving the fighter's adaptability. In the China-Burma-India theater, the P-61 faced a different environment. Vast distances and limited infrastructure meant night fighters operated far from base, patrolling immense sectors with minimal backup. The 427th Night Fighter Squadron, assigned to defend Allied installations in China, routinely flew missions covering hundreds of miles. Japanese bomber crews in the region soon recognized the danger and often abandoned night raids entirely when reports indicated American night fighters were active. In the Mediterranean, P-61 activity was limited, as British Mosquito squadrons already provided capable night defense. Some U.S. units in Italy and southern France converted from P-70s to P-61s in late 1944, but by then the Luftwaffe night bombing efforts had effectively collapsed due to fuel shortages and the general disintegration of German air power. Across all operational areas, the P-61 compiled a strong combat record. Official figures credited Black Widow crews with 127 confirmed aerial victories and an additional 18 V-1 flying bombs destroyed. While modest compared to day fighter tallies, these numbers reflected the inherent difficulty of nocturnal warfare. Enemy aircraft were harder to locate, meaning contact opportunities were infrequent. Yet when radar-guided intercepts occurred, they were usually decisive. The element of surprise left opponents little chance to respond before being hit. For experienced P-61 squadrons, the kill-to-sortie ratio was notably high. Elite units such as the 418th Night Fighter Squadron achieved results rivaling those of top daylight fighter formations. The primary limitation was not aircraft performance or crew proficiency, but the dwindling pool of enemy aircraft still flying. By early 1945, Japanese aviation had been so severely depleted that locating viable targets became the chief difficulty for American night fighter crews. The final stage of the P-61's wartime career came over Japan itself, as Allied forces closed in during the summer of 1945. By then, Japan's strategic situation was catastrophic. The Imperial Navy had been annihilated, industrial centers lay in ruin from B-29 raids, and the Soviet Union had joined the war in the east. In the dark skies above the home islands, American radar-equipped fighters roamed freely, transforming even the once safe cover of night into hostile territory. Indications suggested American night fighters were airborne. The fear of detection had become so pervasive that Japanese pilots frequently turned back before reaching their targets. The mere presence of the P-61 in the skies was enough to break the morale of seasoned crews who once relied on darkness as their greatest ally. What had begun as a tactical innovation had evolved into a form of psychological warfare, one that paralyzed enemy initiative without requiring combat. By late 1944 and into 1945, Japanese night operations had virtually collapsed. Units that once launched regular bombing raids against Allied airfields and supply bases found themselves grounded by the combined effect of attrition, equipment shortages, and sheer terror of radar-equipped interceptors. Reports from captured Japanese air personnel revealed the depth of this fear. Many crews described the Black Widow as an unseen predator, its sudden appearance from the void always fatal. The aircraft's powerful radar and heavy armament had created an aura of inevitability. Once detected, escape was impossible. The P-61's impact extended beyond the immediate tactical sphere. Its success demonstrated the effectiveness of integrating technology, training, and doctrine into a cohesive combat system. Every element, the advanced SCR-720 radar, the powerful twin-engine design, and the specialized night fighter training program, combined to create a weapon far more capable than any of its individual components. American air strategy had evolved to treat darkness not as a hazard but as an opportunity. Night, once the natural ally of Japanese air power, had been transformed into a battlefield domain under American control. Kendall and Shearer's encounters on August 14th and 15th, 1945 symbolized this complete transformation. Their victories, achieved without firing a single shot, illustrated the P-61's dominance not only in firepower but in psychological influence. The Japanese pilots' fatal overreactions underscored how deeply the aircraft's reputation had penetrated enemy consciousness. Even as surrender orders circulated, even as the Emperor's broadcast echoed across Japan, fear of the Black Widow compelled men to die trying to escape from it. For the Americans, these final missions served as both an epilogue and an affirmation. The P-61 had achieved the goal it was designed for, mastery of the night. Its crews had taken a domain that once favored the enemy and turned it into an extension of Allied power. The Black Widow had become more than a machine. It was a symbol of technological supremacy, a manifestation of America's ability to solve complex wartime problems through innovation and determination. Post-war analysis reinforced this view. Military historians and engineers studying the P-61's record noted that it represented a new paradigm in aerial warfare, the seamless combination of electronics, airframe design, and human skill. Radar had changed everything. It allowed pilots and operators to act as a single organism, navigating and fighting in conditions that would have been impossible only a few years earlier. The lessons learned from the P-61 directly influenced post-war development of jet-powered night fighters and later all-weather interceptors. Japanese pilots who survived the war often spoke of their encounters with awe and bitterness. Some compared fighting the P-61 to battling a ghost, one that could see through the dark and strike without warning. The fear it inspired lingered long after the war ended. In interviews decades later, veterans admitted that by 1945, they no longer believed victory was possible once a Black Widow appeared on their radar, if they even had radar at all. From a strategic perspective, the psychological toll of these encounters had profound consequences. The steady decline in Japanese night operations freed vast Allied resources for offensive use, accelerated logistics, and improved troop readiness. Entire sectors of the Pacific that once shut down after dusk now functioned continuously. The nights that had once belonged to Japan were now illuminated by American control, symbolically and literally. In the end, the story of the P-61 Lady in the Dark and its final missions was not just about air combat, but about transformation, the shift from vulnerability to dominance, from fear to mastery. The aircraft's sleek black silhouette embodied the triumph of reason, science, and human ingenuity over chaos and superstition. The same qualities that had allowed the United States to build radar-guided night fighters also powered the broader victory in the Pacific. And so, on those last nights of the war, as Kendall and Shearer returned to base beneath a darkened sky now free of opposition, the symbolism was clear. The era of the Japanese night raider was over. The silence that followed was not just the quiet of peace returning. It was the sound of an empire's final defeat, brought about in part by a black twin-engine aircraft that had made even the night itself an American ally, were entering service, bringing with them far greater speed and advanced radar systems that rendered the piston-engine Black Widow obsolete. Yet, despite its retirement, the legacy of the P-61 endured. It had proven that the night skies could be mastered through the intelligent fusion of radar, firepower, and disciplined crew coordination. The aircraft effectiveness had reshaped aerial warfare doctrine, convincing military planners that no future air force could afford to neglect nighttime operations. The P-61's psychological and tactical impact was far greater than its relatively modest production numbers might suggest. Fewer than 750 were built, but their influence spread across every major theater of the war. In Europe, they hunted German intruders over England and the continent. In the Pacific, they shattered the last remnants of Japan's air resistance. The Black Widow's imposing silhouette and reputation for invisibility created an aura of fear that outlasted the war itself. Former Japanese and German pilots later admitted that knowing a radar-equipped enemy could strike unseen at any hour was deeply demoralizing. Post-war testing of captured Japanese and German night fighters confirmed just how advanced the P-61 truly was. Its SCR-720 radar could detect targets more than 5 miles away and distinguish individual aircraft flying in close formation. Combined with its 420mm cannons and 4.50 caliber machine guns, this made the Black Widow one of the most heavily armed fighters of the war. It could loiter for hours, climb quickly, and absorb punishment thanks to its rugged twin-boom design. Pilots praised its stability, and radar operators valued the spacious rear cockpit that allowed efficient teamwork in darkness. Even after retirement, the Black Widow continued to influence aviation research. Data gathered during weather flights and early radar experiments informed later jet interceptor designs. Engineers who had worked on the P-61 systems went on to pioneer airborne radar integration for the F-86D Saberdog and the F-89 Scorpion, aircraft that directly inherited its mission and technological lineage. The lessons learned from its operations helped define the tactics of the early Cold War's air defense network, where radar interception became the backbone of continental security. Culturally, too, the Black Widow left a distinctive mark. Its name, drawn from the venomous spider, perfectly captured both its appearance and its deadly precision. Crews often personalized their aircraft with dramatic nose art, making the black-painted fighters symbols of silent, unseen power. For many airmen, serving in a P-61 squadron represented elite status. The select few fought in total darkness, guided only by instruments and trust in their partners. Today, only a handful of P-61 survive in museums or restoration projects, reminders of an extraordinary chapter in aviation history. One of the most complete examples, under restoration in California, still bears the name Lady in the Dark, the aircraft that achieved the war's last confirmed aerial victory without firing a single shot. That moment on the night of August 14, 1945, when an unseen adversary crashed into the sea while fleeing an American night fighter, stands as a symbolic end to an era. The age of the propeller-driven warplane was closing, and the jet age was dawning. But in that transition, the Black Widow held a singular distinction. It had conquered the night, proving that even darkness itself could become an American ally. Successful within its designed role, yet it arrived too late and in too few numbers to influence the broader outcome of the air war in a decisive way. Its impact was concentrated, not widespread, a precision tool rather than a blunt instrument. Still, in the sphere where it operated, the P-61 achieved a level of mastery that few wartime systems ever did. It transformed night combat from a domain of uncertainty into one of dominance. Every element of its design, from its powerful radar to its heavy armament and two-man crew concept, had been crafted to solve a specific problem, and together they formed an integrated solution that worked with remarkable effectiveness. In operational terms, the Black Widow achieved one of the highest kill-to-loss ratios of any American aircraft of the war. Its ability to intercept and destroy enemy aircraft in total darkness was unprecedented, and its psychological effect on the enemy was incalculable. It imposed fear, hesitation, and confusion, diminishing the will to fight even before combat began. Yet it was not perfect. The aircraft's large size and relatively low top speed made it vulnerable in daylight, and its complex radar systems required constant maintenance and skilled operators. In tropical or maritime environments, corrosion and electronics failures were common, adding to the workload of already overburdened maintenance crews. Despite these challenges, the P-61's record remained impressive, and it was widely respected by those who flew and maintained it. The post-war evaluation of the P-61 by the newly formed U.S. Air Force recognized both its pioneering role and its obsolescence in the emerging jet era. Its design philosophy, however, lived on. The two-seat, radar-equipped interceptor became a permanent fixture of Cold War air defense strategy, evolving into jet-powered successors like the F-89 Scorpion, F-94 Starfire, and eventually the F-101B Voodoo. Each of these aircraft carried within it the operational DNA of the Black Widow, teamwork between pilot and radar operator, integrated radar-guided interception, and readiness to engage unseen targets at night or in foul weather. Beyond its technological legacy, the P-61 symbolized a broader truth about the war it helped to win, that the United States had mastered the art of combining science, industry, and human skill to achieve overwhelming superiority. The Black Widow was not built in vast numbers because it did not need to be. Its very existence forced the enemy to change behavior, abandon tactics, and surrender the night sky. It was a weapon of influence as much as destruction, reshaping the rhythm of warfare without always firing a shot. For the men who flew it, the P-61 remained unforgettable. Veterans spoke of the strange beauty of flying through darkness, guided by glowing radar screens and the voice of a trusted partner. They remembered the eerie moments before an interception, when a blip on the scope turned into a shadow ahead, then a flash of flame as cannon shells found their mark. They remembered, too, the silence that followed, the vast, empty dark after victory. These memories lingered long after the aircraft themselves were gone. In museums today, the surviving Black Widows stand as silent witnesses to an era when flight and technology converged in new and terrifying ways. Their matte black fuselages still seem to absorb light, their long noses hinting at the secret power once hidden within. The P-61 was not merely a machine. It was a symbol of adaptation and ingenuity, a testament to what could be achieved when imagination met necessity. Its contribution to the Allied victory was not measured in numbers alone, but in what it represented: the triumph of human intellect over the chaos of war, and the conquest of the last great frontier of the air, the night itself. Effective in its intended role, though its late arrival meant it saw barely a year of frontline service. Its limited production compared to other American fighters constrained its broader influence, and by the time the Black Widow had achieved supremacy in the night skies, Japan's defeat was already a foregone conclusion, driven more by the submarine blockade, the relentless strategic bombing, and the island-hopping campaign than by any individual aerial contest. These were the operations that truly broke Japan's capacity to wage war, not the nocturnal duels between P-61s and Japanese bombers. Yet within its specialized arena, the P-61's impact was unmistakable. It overturned the balance of night warfare, transforming what had once been Japan's tactical advantage into a decisive American one. It shielded Allied ground and naval forces from night attack during critical campaigns, demonstrated the effectiveness of radar-equipped night fighters, and established doctrines that would influence air combat for generations. Just as crucially, it imposed upon Japanese airmen a psychological defeat every bit as consequential as their material losses. The great irony of the P-61's legacy lies in how completely it reversed the equation of nocturnal warfare. For more than 3 years, from Pearl Harbor through mid-1944, darkness had been Japan's shield. Japanese bombers used the cover of night to strike and vanish before any effective response could be mounted. American troops lay awake under the drone of unseen engines, acutely aware of their helplessness. That fear eroded morale as surely as bombs shattered buildings. The arrival of the Black Widow changed everything. Within months, darkness no longer favored the attacker. It became the hunter's domain. The same black sky that had once protected Japanese crews now hid American predators guided by invisible radar. Bomber formations that had once approached with confidence now flew in dread, haunted by the knowledge that somewhere behind them, unseen, a Black Widow might already be closing in. This transformation was not luck but design. American engineers and strategists recognized night fighting as a solvable technological challenge. They developed radar systems, fitted them into an aircraft built to exploit them, trained crews to mastery, and fielded enough of those units to make the system matter. Japan, crippled by shortages of materials, research capacity, and industrial infrastructure, could not match this. Its attempts, higher flight altitudes, radar countermeasures, chaff, fighter escorts, were all in vain against the fundamental advantage radar provided. The real lesson of the P-61 story lies here, in the power of technological adaptation. The side that foresees emerging threats, crafts the right tools, and deploys them effectively can redefine entire dimensions of warfare. The Black Widow was never the most glamorous or numerous of American fighters, nor the highest scoring, but it was arguably among the most perfectly suited to its mission. In that narrow role, its dominance was absolute. Japanese forces soon chose not to fight at all rather than endure catastrophic losses. To the men who flew it, pilots like Carroll Smith and Dale Haberman, radar operators like Philip Porter and Raymond Mooney, it was more than machine. It was the embodiment of cutting-edge science turned into survival. They were the first generation of electronic warriors, stalking unseen prey through tropical nights, guided only by flickering green radar scopes and the calm voices of their partners. Their duels in total darkness tested both nerve and discipline to their limits. When the last operational F-61 was retired in 1952, it marked the close of an era. The propeller-driven night fighter gave way to jet interceptors, and the technology that had seemed miraculous in 1944 was quickly surpassed by faster, longer-range systems. But the underlying truth endured. In war, the side that can perceive when the enemy cannot, that can strike without being seen, holds a supremacy that no number of adversaries can offset. The Black Widow flew for only 8 years, fought for just 1, and existed in such small quantities that it barely registered in production totals. Yet its impact was profound. It safeguarded American troops, silenced enemy night raids, proved the viability of radar-guided interception, and left Japanese aviators with memories of dread that persisted long after the surrender. Ultimately, the story of the P-61 is a story of how technology reshaped warfare's oldest battlefield, the night itself. It turned darkness from a shroud into a medium of vision and precision, where skill was fused with science and courage with circuitry. It was a contest between innovation and desperation, between foresight and exhaustion, and in that contest, the Americans prevailed. The Japanese pilots who survived spoke decades later with a kind of haunted respect for the invisible hunters that had tracked them through the dark. They recognized the P-61 as a herald of a new age, one where machines would see farther than men, and victory would depend less on daring than on detection. They were right. Air combat's future would belong to radar, to beyond visual range weapons, to unseen engagements. The Black Widow was a bridge between the dogfights of legend and the electronic battles that would define the modern age. Yet for the crews who flew her in 1944 and 1945, none of that mattered. Their task was simple: protect American forces from night attack. Their tool was a P-61. Their enemy had ruled the night for 3 long years. By war's end, the balance was reversed. The night now belonged to America, and Japan had learned in blood that darkness was no longer their ally. The unseen hunters had prevailed. Thank you for watching. For more in-depth historical analyses, explore the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.